Hello, welcome back. So today in this video, let us understand SCD types, that is slowly changing dimension, and what are the different types of SCDs. And if you are basically working in any data domain, and if you are working in IT industry with working with definitely with some other way related to data, so then definitely you might have crossed a path where you might have heard about SCD types. And it is always good to understand the SCDs with a real-time example, because what I heard is most of the people see the SCD concept is too complicated, because maybe it is not well explained or well understood with some basic examples. So today in this video, let us try, our honest effort to make you guys understand what exactly SCD types with simple examples or layman examples as much as possible, so you can digest the concept very easily. So before proceeding, if you are new to this channel and haven't yet subscribed to this channel, we would recommend you to please subscribe and also press bell button for instant notifications. So let's get started. So what is SCD? SCD is nothing but a slowly changing dimension, right? And you might be wondering what is exactly, why we want to learn SCDs, right? So SCD concept is important if you're working in any of these roles, right? You might be a SQL developer, you might be working as a data engineer, data analyst, ETL developer, data architect, modeler, or reporting developer, data scientist, or even data or ETL tester, right? So it makes it very important to understand the SCD types, because all these roles demand that you are working with the basic understanding of database concept and SCD types. So if you are working already in any of these roles, or if you are aspiring to be into any of these roles, it actually makes sense to understand these concepts with more clarity, right? So we will see. By end of this video, what you can expect is you can definitely expect uh, that you will be very clear with the concept that when to use SCDs and what kind of SCDs for a given scenarios that you can use, because there are different types of SCDs. So you need to understand which type of SCD is suitable for which scenario, right? And also you will be able to identify which type of SCD is already implemented in a maybe in a project that you're already working in, right? So if there is already SCD implemented, by seeing and understanding the concept, you will be able to identify and um mark which type of SCD that belongs to, right? So with that, I would recommend you to please watch this video till end, so that you will benefit all of this with these understandings, right? So now let's proceed with a further slide where we will understand what is SCD. So what is SCD? SCD, as you know, by full form, definitely it is a slowly changing dimension. But you might have heard about a dimension concept. So dimension is a concept of data warehouse. You might have heard about fact tables and dimension tables, and this is the same dimension table we are talking here. So if you are not sure about fact and dimension table, I would recommend you to please go and Google it out and see some content around it, so you'll understand much deeper. But dimension table by behavior, or by its behavior, it is not supposed to change. That means it is mostly static. When I say mostly static, so that means you need to closely observe what is why I'm telling it as mostly. That means mostly it will not change, but still there is a possibility that the data will change. However, the main difference between fact and dimension table is a fact table will change very frequently. That means, like, take example of a transaction table where or a billing table, right? So where every second or every minute there will be a billing or invoice getting generated, and there will be a new records getting inserted into that table, and the entire transaction is maintained in that table over the time. However, the behavior of dimension table is not so. That means even though it changes, it is not so frequent as fact table. And let us take an example. As you can see, like product table, right? So you can see the product table is having like product ID, product name, product type. And any e-commerce website or e-commerce company can maintain this in their database, and they and it is a dimension table. It's the best example of a dimension table, because if you closely observe the product ID, product name, product type, all these columns are not changing every second, right? Or every day or every hour for that matter. It might change over a period of time, like once in a month or once in a quarter, it might change, but not so frequently. And even though you consider price, so price also, price is a variable, right? It can vary month on month or something like that, but definitely not on every second or every hour the price will change. So even though we add a price column which is still which makes this table little changing, right? But however, it is not like a fact table. That is why still we are calling it as a dimension table. So the definition you understood, right? Like slowly changing dimension. That means the dimension is changing. I mean, what is dimension? Dimension means it's a dimension table what we are talking. And dimension table data might change, but it changes slowly. That is why we are calling it as a slowly changing dimension. So if you understand this concept, so then it is very easy to understand the further concepts and further types of SCDs. Right? And now let us go to the first type of SCD, which is what we are calling it as a fixed dimension. So you will understand why we are calling it as a fixed dimension. So it is the simplest form of SCD, and it is not so frequently used, but let us see what exactly it means. Take example, you have a source table where it is a OLTP, OLTP system where you are getting that data to your data warehouse. So in that case, what might happen is the data in the source might change. However, you are not intended to update the data in your dimension table. Let's take an example. Suppose on a day one for a country, a particular fax number is there, and what happens on day, and you will get that entire row as it is on day zero to your dimension table. And what happens on the day one is the fax number of that particular country changes, but still you are not interested to update that fax number and keep the old fax number as it is. So why this scenario occurs, right? Because as you know, there might be, fax number is not being used nowadays to capture to be captured, right? Because it is rarely used nowadays because of the mail communications and other sort of communications. So business might decide the fax number is not relevant anymore to the business, or to be captured when the particular data is getting changed in the source. No need to change that in our dimension table. So this is actually not so frequently used because any business want to keep the data updated, uh, unless in some rare scenarios like this. Okay, so that is why. So whatever changes in the source here on day 0, day 1, day 2, your dimension table remains fixed. That is why we are calling it as fixed dimension. So hope this is clear. So now let us move for the SCD type 1, where we are calling it as no history. What that means is whenever the data updates in the source system, you will go and update your dimension table, but you are not maintaining any history, right? Let us take an example so that you will understand it much better. So on day zero, what happens is a particular employee table, in the employee table, employees working in the location Amsterdam, and you will get that data as it is to your dimension table on day zero, right? And on the next day, what happens is a person location changes from Amsterdam to London on day one, and as you can see, the London is actually updated in your dimension table from Amsterdam, which is a previous value. However, if someone asks me the history of this employee where he has worked in the his locations, history of his location where he has worked before London, so there is no history because you are keeping only the current version here. Only the latest snapshot is stored in the dimension table, right? The old history is lost. So this also might be a scenario where a business is not worried, or business doesn't have any relevance to keep history, right? So in that case, they can use SCD type 1, which is again not so frequently used, and it is not a good practice to do this because there is you lost a history and there is no audit basically, or audit or history maintained anywhere, right? So that is where you're calling it as SCD type as no history. You're just updating the data, but there is no history. So now let us go for the SCD type 2, which is the most popular one, and you might have heard about this very frequently when you're talking about SCD. So SCD type is should be a more frequently used uh, or heard or discussed topic. And if you are working for any any multinational company or as a working along with the data, so you might have definitely heard about this. And it is very important to understand this. Just I mean, as a working professional, or you want to shift your roles, or if you want to attend any kind of interviews, right? So this is the most important topic that might be asked or challenged, right? With your understanding. And here, what happens in this SCD type 2 is you maintain the entire history. Okay, that means yeah, I mean, when you say entire history, you might keep the full history or partial history. So that we will that depends on the organization needs. Basically, if they want to keep the entire history of the updates, they can still keep it. And also there might be scenario if they want to archive the older than 1 year or 2 year, they can do that. But the main concept here is the history of an entire record is maintained here. Okay, and whenever there is a update happening in the source system, what happens is the new record is created in the dimension table. So let's take a example, right? So source table, if you take a country, India, and it is having a currency exchange rate on a particular given day as 80.23, and you will take that as it is to your dimension table. But the important point here is whenever a new record updates, whenever a new record is getting updated, so you maintain that as a flag. That means like you are actually having a like supporting columns here, like there is a flag column and there is a date effective column. Why exactly we are adding these two columns, right? So that importance will be understood in the next when you go for day one, right? On day one, what happens is uh, the same India currency rate will get updated. So in that case, as you can see, the active flag of the current day, that is 21st of March, right? So what happens is that will be kept as S, but the old value, that is yesterday's value, will be kept as will become inactive, right? And you can see the date effective. So the advantage of this is whenever at any given point of time you can able to identify which is the latest record, and also you will be able to keep track of the entire history of a particular given day, what was the interest rate. If someone comes and asks us for any audit purpose or any data triaging purpose, which is the scenario here, right? And you can go ahead and see in this table on a particular using the data effective column on that particular day what was the exchange rate. However, it is always when you're working with the data, so only the latest, the active flag, that means the active record will be used for your any calculation or transformations. But entire the history is also maintained in the dimension table. Basically, so this is the most commonly used, and it is always good practice to implement SCD2 type 2, right? Please keep this in mind, uh, and it is always a good design when you are designing a data model, and because this data might be needed for audit purpose or any data issues or data triaging purpose in future. So it will be very helpful, so you can go ahead and see in this dimension table and answer whatever the questions business has with respect to the change history, right? And yeah, so this is about SCD type 2. So yeah, just if you are having any doubts, please go through this slide one more time and understand it, and also comment in the below section so that I can take another example and explain you better, so that you will get the more understanding of it. So coming to the SCD type 3, so which we are calling it as a previous value columns. What this means and how does it differ from SCD type 2, right? So here you are not maintaining the entire history. You are maintaining only the previous value. That means on a day 0, a particular person is working in California and the his previous location is null, or you can keep the current location. It again depends on how you want to use it. But since I don't have any previous location for this person, I'm keeping it as null. And on day 1, whenever the location updates, right, as you can see, I'm just keeping the current version as Houston and the previous version, which is the yesterday's value, that is California. So here, if you closely observe, on any given day, you can have only two copy of, you can have only two versions, that is current version and the previous version. The entire version is not maintained. Like if you want to go and see this person previous location, like 1 week back or 1 month back or 1 year back, you will not be able to get that here. It is just the previous history you can see here. And this is also rarely used in some cases where maintaining entire history is not needed, but still needs the previous version for some reference or calculation or reporting, right? And this is actually not good in terms of data modeling, because here I'm talking about just the location. And imagine there is one more field called salary, and salary is getting updated, and you will have to introduce two more columns like current salary and previous salary. So this table will actually will grow horizontally, right? So which is not a good data model, we would say. That is the reason SCD types 3 are not so frequently used unless there is a strong reason for it. Okay, so here the important thing here is to notice previous value will be there, so that is why we are keeping it as a previous value columns. So next we will understand SCD type 4, which we are calling as a history table. So why we are calling as a history table? Because it is a combination of SCD type 1 and type 2. So if you quickly recap SCD type 1 what we were doing, right, and SCD type 2 what we were doing. In SCD type 1 we were actually replacing the entire value from source to the dimension table, right? And in SCD type 2 we were actually maintaining the history, entire history. So here we are doing both of them, but we are capturing them in a separate history table, that the change in the separate history table. If you take on day 1, what happens is, so you are getting a person is working in a particular location, and you will get that value as it is. And so like if you are as you saw in the SCD type 2, right, so we are maintaining the history. So that history is not maintained in the dimension table, but it is maintained in the separate history table. But in the dimension table, only the current value will be there. So putting into the dimension table is a concept of SCD type 1, right? And updating the history or keeping the history in a particular table, that is a concept of SCD type 2. So it's basically the combination of both. As you can see on day 1, California changes to Houston, and dimension table is getting completely updated from California to Houston. There is no history maintained here, which is SCD type 1. However, maintaining the history is given into a separate history table, which is a concept of SCD type 2. And you can see the previous active flag is N and the current active flag is Y, and with the date you can keep track of entire whole history, right? So basically I think you are able to clearly understand why we are calling it as a combination of SCD type 1 and SCD type 2. And this is also this is a good design, I would say, because you are not overloading a dimension table here. Because the one of the drawback of SCD type 2 would be if there are frequent changes, the dimension table itself can grow and it can lead to a performance issue. So in that case, either you want to archive the older record, so that is one solution, or the better solution is maintain this into a separate history table, so that the history table can grow, but it will not impact the performance of the dimension table. So hope this is clear, right? So that's why, since we are having a separate history table here, that's why SCD type is also, I mean, we can consider as a history table concept. So now let's go for the SCD type 6. So you might be wondering why SCD type 5 is not there and why we directly jump to SCD type 6, right? Interesting, right? Basically, SCD type 6 is a combination of SCD type 1, 2 and 3. That means 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6. So we're just going by the mathematics of addition here and we are calling it as a 6. So yeah, so by the 6 it means that it is a combination of 1, 2 and 3. So and why we are calling it as a hybrid because it is combination of all these three things and maintains the full and partial history along with the previous value. So scenario is not frequently used, but let us see what exactly it is we are talking about here, right? So basically in the source table you have a record, I mean a person, employees working in a particular location and you capture that as it is. But as you can see as a concept of SCD type 1, you should replace the value. So let me get the next day value so to understand it much better. So as you can see, a particular location of a person updated from California to Houston here. Okay. So what is the concept of SCD1, right? Replace the entire value. So that's what I'm doing. The current value is replaced from California to Houston. So that is the concept of replacing the entire history. There is, I mean, entire record, right? So that is the concept of type 1. SCD type 2 is what? Maintain some active flag and date effective so that you are keeping a history and you are still able to identify which is the active record and which are the previous old records with the supporting columns. So that is SCD type 2. And what is SCD type 3? Right? SCD type 3 is maintaining the previous and current value. Right? So as you can see here, the previous this is actually previous location. So this is a typo here. So previous location is null and current location is California. And here, if you see, previous location is California and current location is null. But still, if you see the next value, it is quite confusing. You might ask me, previous value is supposed to be California, right? Because it was the previous value is California. But I'm still keeping Houston as a current location and previous location here, right? Why this is this is to this is a concept of what? This is a concept of SCD type 1 where you are actually interested only in the current location. So both your current location and the previous location will be Houston only. So this is quite confusing, but please note this. So you are for the current record, whatever the current record is there, both the current location and the previous location will be same because you are working with SCD type 1 where your objective is to keep only the current record, only the current version of it, right? And that is the concept of SCD 1. SCD type 2, active flag and date effective, we are still capturing that, right? And what is SCD type 3? We are maintaining current location and previous location. SCD type 3 will be understood if you take one more day here, right? So if you see here SCD type 3, you can see in the type in the row 2, right? So what happened on the 21st of June, right? So California, I mean the Houston is the current location, but the previous location California is maintained here. So if you take current day, it's always Bangalore, Bangalore. Current and previous location both are Bangalore because you have to abide by SCD type 1. SCD type 2 again active flag and date effective will be helpful for us to maintain the SCD type 2. And SCD type 3 is what? Always um, maintain that value where you actually have the previous and current location. So that we have this previous and current location columns here. And there's one more typo here which is active indicator is N for these two and S for only the current value. So yeah, with this hybrid, what we are trying to achieve here is we are telling that SCD type 1, SCD type 2, SCD type 3, all these concepts are embedded in this, right? So that is where we are calling it as a hybrid SCD type. So this is very rarely used because one thing is uh, uh, it makes things too complicated, and other thing is there is no need of making things so complicated, right? That is a straightforward answer, I would say. And by with this all of these SCD types, we will just go with the summary and understand quickly. So SCD type, there is no change in the dimension table whenever the change happens in the source table. It is very rigid, right? Whatever changes in source, I don't care. SCD type 1, it always overwrites a old value, right? But won't keep any history. So history will be lost here. And SCD type 2 will always maintain either a full history or it might be a partial history by archiving the older values. Depends on the organization needs or how the table grows. And it always create additional records every time so that the entire history is maintained. And how do you identify the older records, and whichever the latest record is by the flag and the date effective column. And SCD type 3 is actually creating an additional column where it maintains the previous value. Here only the -1 version is maintained. That means only the previous value is maintained. If you want to go to the -2 previous value, it is not there. That history is not maintained here. And if you come to the SCD4, generally it is a combination of SCD1 and 2. So where it is basically overwrites the old value, right? And also it actually maintains the history of previous values using history. So basically there is a separate table here, history table. So that in that history table, SCD4 maintains that history going forward, right? Instead of maintaining in the dimension table itself. And finally, SCD type 5 is the hybrid combination which is rarely used. It is little complicated to understand and maintain, and there is no need of that maintaining that complexity and creating that complexity. So it is basically a combination of SCD 1, 2 and 3. So basically these are the different types of SCDs, and if you have any questions, any doubts, I would recommend you to please go back and uh, check this video again. And still if you have any doubts, please leave in the comment. I will try to bring up with possibly the different example so that you can understand much better. So hope this was useful, and thanks.